Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this October 9th at our annual career panel series. The theme of this year's is give them what they need, not what they ask for. And we definitely have a lot of panelists here who have insights and knowledge into this area. So it's going to be great to get started and get to know them. But first, let's go through some housekeeping stuff. So the first thing you need to know, in case you don't know who I am, my name is Gordon Lee. My co-leader there is Jessica Kwok. We co-lead this San Francisco nonprofit user group. We meet on the second Wednesday of each month. Here is our contact info. Next slide. We meet on the second Wednesday of each month from 12 to 1:30. And just sort of, this is just the thing that we say to head off questions that we always get, is that all group leaders, like myself and Jessica, must be volunteers. We cannot be Salesforce employees. Salesforce employees are welcome to be participants in the group, but actually, if you ever end up working for the mothership, you cannot be in charge of any of these groups. So Jessica and I have our respective day jobs, and then we just do this on the side. So there's that. Next up, so agenda today, we're going to do some things on the upcoming events, cross out that walk and talk, and then we're just going to go straight into the main event. And then whoever has time at 1 p.m. Pacific when we end, who can hang back for more networking, please feel free to do so. We'll be on here for at least another half hour after that. All right, so here's actually it. I can't believe we're in October of 2024 already, Q4. So our annual career panel series is today's event. Our November one is still TBD. And December is our end of year party. Preparations or discussions at least, have already started on that. And usually it ends up being in San Francisco, but maybe we go to the East Bay this year. We don't know. It's usually an in-person event with a lot of the user groups around the Bay Area. But keep an eye out for that. But if you guys all signed up on Bevy and know about this meeting, you'll just automatically be notified once the meeting invite goes up. On that note, you're all here, so I'm assuming that you have all seen this. This is our one-stop shop for upcoming events and group information and more. It is built on Salesforce Experience Cloud, and it has all the information, including our past recordings. So if you scan that QR code, you'll be able to see our site. And then once this recording is up, usually by the end of the week, we'll post it up on the site as well. So anything you need to know about our group, where we met, some of these slides, it's all there. And on that note, we are always looking for future topics. Sometimes it gets a little weary when it's just Jessica and I kind of sitting together at a coffee shop, figuring out how to plan out for the year. So if you ever any topics that you want to hear us talk about, or have any feedback or anything like that, please feel free to go on that site, click the Talk to Us button, submit your request, and if we end up choosing your topic for a future meeting, we will send you a $50 gift card to one of the Salesforce stores. Jessica, do you remember which store it is?
I think just the general one, the one with the most stuff.
The one with the most stuff. Yeah, it's a really good one. So that's the one we're going to go for. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. And today, this is our career panel. We've got Brad and Vanessa and Katie and Dennis. And in a moment, I'll stop sharing the slides and let them introduce themselves. We're going to give everyone about 3 minutes to do a quick intro, tell us about how they got started in the Salesforce ecosystem, and then why did they choose their current career path. But I'll leave this up for another 10 seconds in case people want to take a photo and get the contact information afterwards. And for the panelists, we're just going to go in first name alphabetical order. So we'll start with Brad and then a Dennis, but let's give another couple seconds here for everyone. All right, great, stop sharing. Okay.
Great.
All right, Brad, take it away.
Dive in, yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Struss. I run Bigger Boat Consulting. We're a Salesforce consulting firm focused on housing and human services organizations, and work with a lot of folks down in the Bay Area. And then, sorry, your questions were, how did I get started? So I'd worked in for-profit tech for a couple of decades, and then saw an opening at a nonprofit-focused consultancy, and worked there for a couple of years before splitting off and founding Bigger Boat Consulting. And the thing I really like about consulting is I enjoy working with a really varied and diverse set of organizations and helping solve just a wide range of different problems.
Dennis, I think it's over to you.
My name is Dennis Pelko. I am a Senior Manager of Enterprise Applications for the Association of Energy Affordability. here in Emeryville, which is a nonprofit that's committed to achieving energy efficiency in new and existing low-income buildings. I've been in the nonprofit sector for about 28 years, originally starting in theater. In 1996, I founded Gemini Children's Theater in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And if anybody knows anything about theater, out of necessity, it's really hard to kind of keep the doors open because you don't usually have a lot of support. So you got to figure out creative ways to kind of like manage your processes. So I really started building Excel workbooks and Access databases. I don't know if anybody's ever remember Access, to manage our registration forms and tickets and financials and stuff. And it really saved a lot of time. And then in 2029, I moved to Atlanta, where I worked for an energy nonprofit called Southface. And that's where I was pulled into the Salesforce like ecosystem and immediately fell in love, because what I enjoyed most about it was its flexibility, and it allowed me to still be creative. Since I was involved in the arts, I needed a job that I could troubleshoot and think creatively. So it really filled that void for me. And I don't think I would have stuck with it if it wasn't such a great flexible platform. And then in 2021, I joined AEA, and that's kind of where I am now.
Thanks, Dennis. I think if I know my alphabets correctly, I think Katie's next.
Okay. Hi, I'm Katie McFadden. I'm based in San Francisco and co-founder of Common Voyage. And we're a nonprofit Salesforce consultancy working with lots of different types of program management and fundraising nonprofits. And I got into this from working at a nonprofit. First job out of college, worked in student exchange, and I dealt with a lot of teenage student issues, and then discovered operations and vastly preferred that. So we worked with some consultants. I fell in love with the whole process of like designing and building and all of that. And then I ended up meeting someone at Dreamforce who runs the Cape Town user group, and went out to South Africa to like fake it till I made it as a consultant. And I've been consulting ever since around, well, I started working in Salesforce around 2010. So yeah, that's my story. Am I forgetting one of the questions? Or was that that's
No,
it? Okay, cool.
it's good. Thank you.
Over to you,
And-
Vanessa.
Hi, everybody. I am Vanessa Grant. I have the very heartwarming trailblazer story of when Salesforce came into my life in 2010. I was a VP of business operations, and I did some demos, and Salesforce was really good, so I signed on the dotted line. And then Salesforce came into my life. Very heartwarming. But I was very blown away by Salesforce, and when I ended up getting laid off in 2017, unfortunately, and was trying to figure out what the rest of my career looked like, if I was going to still just be a operations executive or kind of stick with the Salesforce thing. And after taking a weird detour as a DocuSign consultant, I got sat next to an IT business analyst. I said, "Oh, what's a business analyst?" And then I Googled the word Salesforce business analyst. And I was like, I don't have to be the most technical person in the room in order to have a Salesforce career. And so I would say the next phase of my career began at that point. That was around 2019. So I did a number of years of Salesforce consulting, mostly with a focus on Salesforce business analysis. And I have limited nonprofit experience, but at this point, my passion still is with Salesforce business analysis. I co-lead the Salesforce BA virtual Trailblazer community. I believe it's the only one. And I think that's why I got the invite here, because we're going to talk about a lot of BA stuff. So excited to be here.
Thank you all, Vanessa, as well, for that. So quick housekeeping for everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to throw it into the chat. Jessica and I will be monitoring that. There'll probably be some opportunities here as the panelists are going through the questions, that if you have a question, maybe feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, ask that question as well. Pretty open conversation. Keep in mind it's recorded. So as I told the panelists, like keep your cussing to a minimum for now, at least until we turn off the recording. But Jessica, I'll pass it over to you to ask the panelists the first questions.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's start us off with the first question. And this one's going to be for Brad. What are some real life questions you've used to uncover what users are actually after?
Sorry, I lost my mute button. Yeah, so we always start with like, what are the goals of your work? both like overall as an organization and in each particular area. And this really gives us a shared understanding of what they're trying to accomplish, and then really helps like inform, frame, and prioritize the work we're going to do. And for us, it provides like a super useful filter when people come up with requests or say, hey, I want this particular feature. It really helps us say, okay, great, how does this fit into one of these goals? And then I think the second sort of the other major question we ask is we ask why all the time, because it really helps us understand like what is the core of what's needed. It helps identify is just something being done because that's the way we've always done things, or that's the way the current system does things. And we really want to make sure we're avoiding building a mirror of whatever their current system is in Salesforce, because that's often isn't going to really help them solve their problems. And so those are probably the kind of the two big techniques that we use for that.
Thanks, Brad. Dennis, Vanessa, or Katie, anything you wanted to add to that particular example? I know this is all about uncovering what our users actually need and not what they are asking you for. And we'll get into some more questions on that, but just wanted to see if there's any other questions or additional insights that you all want to add to that.
I think sometimes, depending on the project, sometimes I'll even start them off on when this is all done, what's the reporting going to look like? And that way I get a sense of how they're like what information they're expecting to uncover, what insights they're expecting to uncover. And oftentimes that'll kind of set the idea in my mind on how this is probably going to end up, which is oftentimes a redirection of what they think it is. Just because they might think that the data is laid out a certain way, but once they kind of talk me through how they're expecting to receive it or the insights they're expecting to get out of it, it turns into a different conversation.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, yeah, I mean, where do they need to go? What are they expecting their ultimate, report out or dashboarding or whatever, and then where are they now is kind of like really critical questions to kind of figure in the missing gap.
I think it's also, we call ourselves CRM therapists sometimes. I pull a lot from the therapeutic community in terms of how to do consulting. And I think sometimes, kind of to your point, Vanessa, there's like a mode switch of when someone's sharing, like, I need this thing. They're kind of in like operational mode. They have a timeline. They know the solution. Like it's kind of an execution mode. And then to kind of switch them back, almost like crack that, like push them back to, I love the question, like, what would this look like if, you had what you wanted or something, to kind of shift to like a slower, more like, well, I'm just really frustrated because every time the quarterly report comes up, I don't have the numbers I need. And then, okay, now we're like talking. So, tell me about that, putting aside the solution.
I'm seeing a lot of nods from the people whose cameras are on. So it looks like we're hitting a nerve here. So Katie, on that, let's pull on that thread a little bit more. You mentioned that you pulled a lot from the therapeutic community, which is, I think, great in terms of transferable skills of like, hey, this is something I know here, but let's apply it to here. So keeping that in mind, maybe not, maybe can you share an example of like when a user, let's say, asks for a specific a feature or a field, like how did you approach their understanding of like the actual problem behind that request?
So this has been so fun this week. I guess I've known for about a week I'd be on this panel just listening for different examples of exactly what we're talking about. And there's just like so many every day. So it could be a really fresh one. I was on a call yesterday and with a client, and they got an email from a user that said, hey, so this client had just built out this huge complex thing to track scoring. And they said, hey, our team is actually going to use a different tool for scoring. I don't know what it is or where it came from. And we need to talk to you about how we can integrate it to Salesforce. So we've got like not using what's been built, wanting to go rogue, wanting to do an integration. It's like all the layers. And they wanted to demo it at their retreat in 2 weeks because they figured this could be wrapped soon, or at least mocked, let's be generous. Okay, so this stuff happens all the time. And I think a couple things of ways that we respond to that is firstly, I really try and like accept the ideas. Like I might already know from my perspective that this is like a blasphemous amount of uh technical debt for the situation, but I really try and like let them air out what they need to say, because in those ideas and solutions are actually like needs and things that they're worried about, and I need to know that, you know, so I kind of like let it fly around loosely in the room for a moment while I hear the core of it. And then secondly, I always try and have a conversation. So again, like making space. So yep, let's get on a call, and I don't want to reject them or anything. Like, let's get on a call and talk about that idea or something. And then kind of like massage it from there. And then I also try and get them on a screen often, because when they're solutioning, they're not representing the problems and the needs, but when I peg it to reality of like, oh, where on the screen is that problem happening, I can kind of get them back into their current world and kind of read between the lines to get the actual user stories and requirements.
Panelists, anybody want to add to that? Sorry, Jessica.
I know you gotta so real, Katie. Comment from someone.
I'm going to drop into the chat one of my favorite blog posts when somebody asks to like add a field. The blog post is called "It's Never Just a Field" by Jen Taylor, and it's one of my probably top 5 Salesforce blog posts of all time. But it just gives you a bunch of questions to ask about. Okay, great. Who's going to keep this updated? How are you going to collect the information, etc. So I'll drop that in the chat.
Thanks, Brad. Jessica, do you want to look at the next one?
Yeah. So speaking of therapeutic kung fu, this one's for Dennis. What techniques do you use during your initial discovery sessions to shift that conversation from wants to needs?
Well, like Katie was saying before, listening is always like the most important thing. And I usually start with just letting them air out like what they want. Like, let's just tell me what it is that's on your mind. Let's get it noted down. Let's like just start developing a list of what you think that you want into this, you know, to be built into this database. And then slowly start to, you know, change those questions from I want this to how is this, how are you planning on, how do you want to solve the issue? Like what is the want to solve the issue? Instead of like for example, years ago, I used to get a lot of requests for, I want a fillable PDF because, you know, everybody's doing that now. And it just is easier for us to get an email with the fillable PDF that we can, you know, enter. But, you know, how is that going to solve their actual problem? Well, their problem was that there's a lot of errors for them inputting it in the database from the PDF form. They were also getting forms that were, you know, handwritten and scribbled, that were illegible. So, you know, potentially then working, you know, depending on their budget, working through, you know, the conversation where it's a little bit more of a, well, how about this is a potential solution to that, or these are there, you have multiple options depending on what your budget is. So, I mean, it's a difficult, a difficult transition, because sometimes people are so adamant that this is exactly what they know they want, and they're, you know, don't want to really sway away from it. And the best, you know, you can do is really just try to put it in a way to make it more of a solution than a just turn on in a feature type thing or whatever.
I think with the initial discovery sessions, like particularly the first one, unless it's something that's out of scope specifically, like, I mean, I try to kind of keep it on track to what's I mean, if we're talking about consulting, you know, then what's on the statement of work, or at least what the initial request is. So if they go off the rails, you know, just try to redirect. But as far as the need versus want, I think it's almost something that I probably iron out a little bit more in like later discovery sessions. Like initially, I don't want to like, I don't want, I'm trying not to get them, you know, like, oh, no, we can't talk about that. Like, talk to me about all of it. And then let's figure out with, you know, my understanding of what you need and how long it's going to take and the budget that we have for it and the timeline we have for it, you know, where that line is. A big thing, at least for me, at least what I aim for, it's always so hard because like, man, time and money is like always lacking on these projects. But I love the concept. There was an article, and I can post it afterwards, but there was an article about shifting from MVP to SLC. The idea of it that nobody enjoys MVP. Like, yes, it's something that works, but like, I don't know, folks that are really good at Salesforce, like who loves like, yay, we delivered MVP, like super proud of that, Um, and the users are usually like, oh yay, it's minimally what I can do to do my job, and it kind of sucks and probably isn't designed with user experience in mind and things like that. Where if we shift more to like SLC, which stands for simple, lovable, and complete, it's the idea that like when Excel was out and Google Sheets came out, Google could not compete on all the bells and whistles that Excel had out of the box. So what it did was it was what is the thing that we're going to do really well and that users are going to love, and it was that you could share sheets and that you could work on sheets simultaneously. So it was simple, but it was lovable and it was a complete product. And then they added things, and so that's kind of the thing where I aim for, where it's not just like a thing and the minimum, that it's something that they're going to love, but finding where that line is. I don't know that I just want to do needs. I kind of want to do needs plus something that they're going to love, like considering user experience, considering training, change management, things that we can fit in within that time and that budget.
And then also too, once you have that initial conversation of everything, I always like to go back to the table too and do a lot of my own research, just to make sure I'm understanding, because a lot of their processes I'm completely in the dark about. I don't know that business, so I have to go and kind of get a little bit of an understanding. But I agree, Vanessa, there's a lot of great things you can suggest that have additional bells and whistles attached to them that you can kind of leverage as, yeah, but if this solution will give you what you want, this solution will give you what you want, but potentially, you can use this feature or this feature, so, but going back and doing a lot of the research to make sure, I come back with as much information as possible for the client is an important step too.
I love that. I remember when Google Sheets, like, yeah, it couldn't do all these things that I wanted to do, but I could collaborate with other people, was the main differentiator. And now everyone obviously has to do that, right? It's like, why would you have a closed system that no one else can collaborate on? Vanessa, I want to actually ask you a follow-up question, going back to fundamentals, just a level set for the room. And this is obviously for all the panelists, because I think there's going to be some varying degrees of this. You mentioned discovery, and I think just for people who might not be versed in the consultant world or versed in sort of like the mechanics of like what you're talking about, can you go through those phases and just give like a quick, like, again, not just you, the whole panel could help out, but like, what is discovery? And then what's next? And then what's after that? Like, what is sort of like your thought process, or what mechanics do you follow on that particular path?
I think, of course, it can vary based on the project and how large it is and things like that, timeline and all that. Usually the way I think of it is there's usually an initial scoping. So, okay, somebody has a project they want to do. They're not sure the size of it, but you want to have that initial meeting so that you can kind of get a feel for, start putting some boundaries around it. And then you can start preparing who you need to speak to really gather what the requirements are. So for me, the next phase after we scope, okay, we kind of have an idea of, is it bigger than a bread box kind of a thing? Once we start doing discovery with the actual stakeholders to understand requirements, requirements would be, what is the product supposed to do? So it's really more product based. At the end of this, what is supposed to be part of the feature set? And then from requirements, I think there's probably, for each requirement, there's likely to be a number of user stories. So then you would start doing more user story sessions. So you'd probably identify your personas. So your personas are going to be the people who, the group of users that would have a point of view and need to accomplish certain things, as that are related to that particular requirement. So you would interview somebody from that persona, start creating some high-level user stories based on that first meeting, with some high-level acceptance criteria and usually I would write my questions. So if I have any follow-up questions, I like to record my meetings so that I can be as thorough as possible. And then I'll have like what I call a grooming session. I've also heard them called other things, and grooming is not a great way to describe the final session, validation session, whatever, where I'll be like, okay, this is the user story. This is what I heard. This is the acceptance criteria that I wrote so far. If all of these acceptance criteria are met, is the user story a success? Am I missing anything? And then all the user stories together, is there anything that I'm missing to meet this requirement? If we delivered all of these and with all of these acceptance criteria that you validated, that requirement will be met. And then that for me is kind of the end of the discovery portion before we would have actual groomed user stories ready to build.
Any of the panelists want to add to that? I know that this is it varies obviously since if you're a consultant versus your internal. I can say that speaking as an internal person, you might be going through these steps, but you probably never identify it that way because you don't have to. You don't have to bill for every single hour that a consultant does. But to everyone else on the panel, any other items to add on these specific areas?
I think that is a beautiful representation of like the most robust way you could do it. And like on the streets, we don't often get to do all of those pieces. That's all I would add, is that sometimes we'll cut some corners depending on the budget and the client and the relationship and whatnot. But I really appreciated hearing that. I love hearing the robust version.
A million times, yes. I am embarrassed at the number of corners that I've cut in my career occasionally, but you know what? At the end of the day, I do a session on user stories. It's online if anybody's interested. But one of the things that I say is one of my top like realistic tips is like don't let perfection get in the way of progress. And I think as consultants and even internal folks, I mean, I try to do the same cadence, honestly, even when I'm a product owner and I have a stakeholder or a business unit that's interested in doing a project and putting it on my roadmap. I still try to do, okay, here's the scoping, still try to do it, even consider myself like an internal consultant. But yeah, I mean, if it's like, oh my God, we have to have this tomorrow because not necessarily tomorrow, but like the cost of delay is X number of dollars per day. Like sometimes you have to make hard decisions and figure out where you're going to cut things. And sometimes it is cheaper to just fix it afterwards than it is to shift left and do it all right up front. Again, it depends on the project, but in an ideal world, that's kind of the layout I would have.
And the other thing I would add is that what I like about the structure is that in my experience working with clients and then for admins working with their customers, their internal people, their staff, this dynamic we're talking on this panel about like asking for asking for the need and not the solution, it's like it's a process. It's a process that everyone's developing together. And so in the beginning you might get a lot of like, hey, I need an active checkbox, I need an active checkbox. And then suddenly they start learning, every time I go to her and say I need this thing, she always like talks to me for half an hour and then makes me tell her this way. And so I think the structures are really cool because they're like a visual symbol and like locking down that best practice, and people learn. And then they're like, okay, I can't ask for a checkbox. I have to like give her this user story. So let me type it out now or whatever. So I like it as like a behavioral cultural shift locked down on paper.
I think, and this is, I'll get on my little BA soapbox here, but I think business analysis is the differentiator between a junior admin and somebody who can call themselves a senior admin or start, making their way towards architect. When you train your stakeholders, your users on how they need to work with you so that you collectively can maintain a healthy Salesforce org, like that's the key. That's the key to not having to like burn your org to the ground every 5 to 10 years and redo it because you've just built up like enormous amounts of tech debt. But it is a process. I'm even thinking like I would love to see somebody do a talk on like how to retrain your users who are treating you like an IT department with like, no, but it's a ticket, just do the ticket. Like, no, it's not that. If you're asking for a config change, we need to have a conversation, like, period.
I like that observation, Vanessa, from you, that like the next step in that career, like from junior to senior admin, is actually a non-technical skill, Right. Like I think a lot of times we get wrapped up in, the cool new thing that Flow can do or AI can do or like all these things can do. And we get so lost in the weeds of that we forget that these are tools used by people. If you don't manage the people, you're not going to manage the tools. So I like that call out there. And I think that's the reason why we do this career panel series and how we always focus on like the people part that we normally don't get to focus on when we're talking about the latest and greatest features from Salesforce all the time. Jessica, I think, has our next question.
Yes, I think kind of just following along on, building up your business analyst skills, running discovery sessions, like that's all and good, I think, when your users are on board. But I think all of us consultants or admin have probably run into one or probably both of these kinds of users. So one, the difficult ones who are like adamant that something has to be some way, or maybe are always poo-pooing, the suggestion. So the difficult one. And then the ones where it's like kind of pulling teeth to get them to like give you the information they need because they can't articulate it. Maybe like they don't quite have the technical expertise. So, how do you navigate those kinds of personalities in those conversations? And I think maybe we'll start with Dennis on this one, and then I think anyone can kind of take it from here.
Yeah. Oh, that's a toughie. So, can you repeat? Sorry, I'm like zoned out for a second. Can you
No
repeat?
worries. So how do you navigate like the process with a difficult user? So one who's like adamant that something must be this way or just generally negative. And then also the users where it's like pulling teeth trying to get the information you need out of them.
Yeah. So I mean, it really depends on that personality, and it is a human touch in the sense that you just got to, you don't want to annoy that person. You want to give them, you need the information. So, I guess the best possible, road that I've kind of gone down is just give them some alternative methods of giving that to you. Like, hey, is email best for you, or would you like to get on a call? Or just text me the information. I don't really care how I need to get it. I just need to get it. So I mean, I'm not as, I haven't run into many of these situations, so I'm not as, versed on those type of personalities, but I don't know if somebody else can chime in a little bit more detail on that.
I think on the pulling teeth one thing we often see is sometimes there's somebody who's trying to protect the users, who's like, oh, I'm their boss, they're really busy, I know exactly what they do, just go through me, I can tell you exactly what they do. And for us, that's always a big yellow flag, because even though they may know what those people do, like you basically get their filter of what their day-to-day work life is like. And we really push to make sure we can like talk to the end users, spend time with them to really understand what it's like to be in their shoes day to day. And that can be challenging because a lot of the organizations and a lot of all our organizations, like people are super busy, but it's really trying to take the time to explain. Great, if we really understand what it's like to be in their shoes every day, we can build a system that helps them do their day-to-day work better.
I mean, how have you dealt with situations where you just weren't getting any response from somebody?
We sort of will raise our hand and say, "Hey, we can't go forward," right? Like, we just
don't
can't
want
do
to
this.
throw anybody under the bus, but sometimes,
Yeah, but it's like, hey, we can't do this project unless you can, let us engage with your users.
Yeah.
And you've presumably at that point you've already hired us and are starting to pay us to do that, and just like, we just need that.
In consulting, but I think also internally, there's the concept of CYA, which is cover your ass. And so if you spot a risk like that, whether it's, Thomas who's married to his spreadsheets and won't talk to you, like that's something you call out and say, okay, well, this is maybe if you have a raid log, if you have a project manager, if you're so lucky to, or even if you don't, like it's important to call it out, write it down, and escalate if you can. But at a certain point, like I think also if you're a consultant, like there's always going to be that one project where, you're just going to like find your happy place and be like, as long as the client is happy, like the project is fine. I can move on to the next one, even if you think it's a stinker. Sometimes they think it's great. But if it's internal, then that's more of you find another you find another way, escalate, or I know particularly with internal orgs, when I have more of I think with internally, it's a lot easier to say no, um, than it is when you're a consultant. When you're a consultant, sometimes you just kind of have to like hold your nose and do it and call out the risk. And I wouldn't suggest you do it that way. Like I truly don't. These are the reasons why. If you're gonna still pay me to do it that way, like, understand the risks. But if you're gonna pay me to do it, like I'll do it. But internally, I think it's a lot uh easier to make an argument that for the sake of the health of the org, you can say no to things or say that you absolutely need the information before you go forward. And as long as, depending on the culture of your organization, and if they do truly believe in Salesforce and understand what it takes to keep a healthy Salesforce org, and again, part of that is the internal training, it's like the Petco pet manual, except for your Salesforce org. How do you like keep your Salesforce org healthy and alive? But as long as people understand, then I think escalating and still just calling out risks in writing is important.
And I mean, in working with working with consultants, I mean, a lot of them are, use like the tools like Jira or Asana and things that they copy usually the group. So if the group is getting that information, even the one person, it's still keeping it visible to the entire team so that the team would know if somebody isn't necessarily. So I mean, that's the way that consultants have approached us with a lot of the just unanswered or vague explanation.
It's interesting, Vanessa, that you say that it's probably easier to do that internally than externally, because I actually find it's easier to do as a consultant because you can kind of come in and speak the truths. I'll sort of say truths that like internally, like because of hierarchy or just how things have always been done. Sometimes people come to us and be like, "Oh man, thanks for doing that. Like we could have never had that conversation or pushed the executive director in that way." But it's probably just depends on the organization and the culture.
Yeah, I think it's also like maybe it's also nonprofit versus like, I mean, I've worked some like mega corporate projects, and like I had the one example I was thinking of when I was talking about that is I worked with some, I mean, I don't know, it's probably a multi-billion-dollar company, and it was a media company. And you were talking about that they won't let you speak to the end users. I had an IT department gatekeeper. They're like, we don't want to bother the business users. I can tell you what they, and I was like, they were trying to like move an entire Salesforce org, like combine two Salesforce orgs into one. And I was like, there's so many conversations we need to have, so many conversations we need to have. I was like, what does an account mean for both of these guys? What is, like between data and at the end of the day, this company paid us a ton of money just to kind of lift and shift everything into the new org, which I was like crying on the inside. But there was just nothing we could do to get past that gatekeeper. And you can bust out all your techniques, but sometimes like if they have that corporate culture, like that is sometimes just hard to fight as a consultant, especially if they've got big purse strings and an IT department that wants to keep their job for 10 years and blame consultants because everything's still broken.
So we actually got an audience submitted question that I think is actually a good segue based off this topic that you guys are just talking about. Are there any tips on getting buy-in from leaders specifically regarding adoption of like a new solution? This person is saying that they struggle effectively communicating the role of change management in a solution's efficacy. So what are your tips for like, let's zero in on this one. What are your tips on dealing with the leaders that you need to basically get buy-in from when you're dealing with a new solution? Oh, and Karine said in the chat that it's her. She asked this question.
And is this pertaining to, I'm just curious about the question, is it pertaining to people asking for things? Like this is just buy-in in general if you're doing a project and you need buy-in. Got it.
Yeah, I think it's buy-in regarding adoption of a new solution.
I'm a big fan of demos. I don't know. I feel like leadership loves to be off the cuff and they just like love to see some pretty little thing and like, don't tell me how it's made, don't tell me all the details, or just it's gonna look like that. It covers this. That makes sense to me. I'm good. So we will put some time and effort into just mocking stuff up and getting by-in that way. And then also just being very tailored to their perspective. So like almost like office hours. Like we are here to meet you wherever your brains are around this and to get you as far as we can until we're all in agreement, and then we can go do the complicated stuff, in the other room.
And budget is always a concern when dealing with nonprofits. And if you don't know what that is at the beginning, or you can't get that information, researching some free to high-end solutions for demos, just because you're not necessarily sure what, but most likely upper management is really going to buy into things that are cheaper and more efficient. As long as you can sell them on the efficiency, the cost effectiveness and how it's really going to solve key issues that they're dealing with, they're more likely to buy into it. The more bells and whistles, sometimes they're more apt to kind of increase the budget a little bit because it's solving potentially multiple solutions too.
I think also talking about the entire delivery process up front is also really helpful in including change management, and making sure that's a discussion up front. So, hey, this is going to be a big change for your users. What do you guys have in as far as your expectations on change management? Or this is how I usually deal with change management. How do you guys want to approach it? But bringing it up early so it's not like, okay, cool, we built this, now we're going to have the conversation, I think is also important, especially when you're talking to leadership. And certainly as a consultant, I've seen it, even the delivery process, just all in even the statement of work. Just so it's clear and upfront, it's in the kickoff deck, you stay consistent, so they keep hearing that story over and over, they know it's coming.
And a lot of our contracts, training was always, and documentation was always part of the deliverable, which always, made oh, okay, then you're going to deal with the training, you're going to create the documentation. That's the biggest part. So that's helpful.
Thank you for that. We have another audience submitted question here. They're coming in now. This question is, well, actually, sorry. First off, Corinne, did that answer your question that you submitted?
You got me started. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
That's great. This next question is I think this is a very interesting one too. Give me a second to digest it here. Basically, it's a question about when you're working through discovery or presenting solutions, folks will sometimes often fixate on the very rare and different edge cases versus like what is actually they're trying to solve for on the normal circumstances. So how do you navigate that? Like, how do you get them to kind of bust through that hurdle and kind of refocus? I think it'd be great if you were like, here's some actual questions we use, or here's an actual story we had. And I will open that up to whoever just asked that question to see if they want to clarify that in case I messed that up completely. Okay. Yes, to the panel.
We'll often ask, like, how often does this happen? How many users are affected by this, to try to kind of understand like the exceptions. And then the other thing we do is, like, I find, like, and this is somebody on one of my project managers has this term, but basically she sort of asks the question about like, is this a problem that should be solved by your human brain? And I love using that task because, like, we work with an organization where they sort of had these annual assessments they wanted to do with their clients in a bunch of different program areas. But then as you got into it, it's just like, well, in some cases we're just going to kind of keep the existing program engagement open. In other cases, we're not even going to ask them about it because we know the client well enough. And so there are just all these exceptions. So it didn't make sense to just sort of create a new set of like 5 assessments each year. And so by sort of using that human brain term, I was like, well, maybe this is a better thing to do with the human brain, and we can set it up so you can review the current state of the assessments with each client, and if you need to renew them for the next year, it's easy to do that. And so that's often a first step, is just like giving them some of the tools within Salesforce, like a list view or something else, to then let their human brain do the work without building something advanced that has a ton of exceptions that you're going to, like, curse every time you have to change the flow for some other exception. Yeah.
I love this question. I think it's so important in the discovery because I've definitely been talking about requirements where we're going deep for 30 minutes and then kind of find out like this has happened once in the history of the org. And I'm like, oh God, I should have asked the question. So I think it's really important to know what's happening 90% of the time and what's happening 10% of the time. And it's really confusing for users because we design for 10% of the time. Like we design for exceptions. And Brad, I love what you're saying about kind of like, is it really an exception or is it just like a human brain situation where you're just flagging it? And yeah, so we generally ask volume questions throughout the discovery to ascertain that, yeah.
Great. All right, we're making good progress through our questions, y'all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
reminder, feel free to message either publicly or Gordon and I if you have any audience questions. But maybe let's move on to another one that we haven't asked yet. So, have you ever encountered a situation where a user's request was based on incorrect assumptions, and how did you guide them to a better solution? And this one will pass to Brad.
I think the number one area we see this is when users request integrations, because I think in the user's mind, the integration is this magic thing that just solves all the problems, whether it's like something straightforward like a MailChimp integration or more complex integrating with some other legacy database system. So we try to really get in and help explain, like in the case of integrations, like the pros and cons, and often I didn't come up with this term, but I've stolen this term from somebody. Sort of the difference between like a big I integration and a little I integration. You know, big I integration is where you have an API or some code where it's automatically doing that integration, and you know the downside of that is often if something changes or breaks in either system, it gets complicated to maintain. You know, which system is actually sort of like the primary source of each individual piece of data. And so often we'll recommend for a first step, like let's do a little I integration. Let's think about like what is the weekly process or the monthly process to be able to get that data from system A to system B. It allows you to, again, kind of use your human brain to look at some of the data and make some decisions about it that might be hard to make in an automated fashion. You know, it's you're understanding exactly what's going on. You're controlling on when those integrations are happening, and it's much simpler and cheaper to implement first. And then once you kind of do it that way, then again, maybe 6 months down the road or a year down the road, maybe it does make sense to do a big I integration for it.
And I find sometimes there's no integration. Like they got misinformation and there's like no connection. You could connect, but that's like a whole different can of worms.
Another common assumption I find when I'm getting requirements or a request is that this doesn't exist. Or I'll say like that it doesn't exist in any way, shape, or form. Often it exists partially somewhere. And so that's a really good one to uncover of usually I'll again like try and get them on a screen and say, okay, is there anything on the screen related to this anywhere? Oh, this field, this, yeah, it's kind of like this, kind of like that. And can you derive it instead of creating a new checkbox or whatever it is?
All right. Here's another one, and this is going to be a bit of a doozy. There's some background on this one. So this audience member said that their largest hurdle is managing Salesforce requests at their small organization is getting senior leadership on their side. The idea of going through a proper business analysis or requirements gathering process is completely, I'm going to say, opposite to the entrenched ways of dealing with IT in general. I'm the first ever Salesforce admin and IT lead to paint the picture. The person who handled all the IT duties in the past and the current CFO / my boss are quickest route to the finish lane types. If we're running 400 meter hurdles, they will gleefully run on the inside edge of the track and celebrate wildly when they come in first. So when a staff member wants something done, exactly 0 people support me when I say we need to take the time to really investigate what they need. A few times they've gone behind my back, built something, and when it failed spectacularly, I gently pointed out that they cheated in the race. So do you have any tips, panel, for getting senior leadership on board with doing the actual business analysis process? That's a doozy.
Again, if anybody wants to like do a talk on how to change the internal culture of an organization, I would be front row because it is hard. I mean, I sometimes it's if it's so bad and there's just like, and you're not, it's just an exercise in frustration at a certain point, just for the sake of your integrity and your Salesforce career. Sometimes it does make sense to just change organizations if they're so stuck in their ways. You don't want to just like form a bunch of bad habits. But as far as things that you can do from the inside, certainly pointing out the challenges, like finding some metrics. Okay, so like how many changes did we have to make? Let's talk about the tech debt that this accumulated. Let's talk about the revisions that we had to make. Maybe find a project that isn't so urgent. Maybe one that you can come up with proactively and say, hey, I'm going to show you how I'm going to try to do this one in my way and see, and then maybe see how people's experience was with it in doing it in more of a proper way if it's something that they're on board with. If you're there long, and I think it's hard to, especially when you're new at an organization, to go in and want to change everything. So I think maybe even initially, you just kind of sit back and just learn the business as much as possible, especially if you're wanting to do a lot of business analysis. And you can like, again, it's even internally, I think you could still sometimes do the like hold your nose and just kind of do things the way that they were. But at a certain point, you build up your alliances within the organization. You understand who your champions are, and maybe start trying to develop some of those alliances and do some of that education with your end users, and maybe do a little bit here and there. It doesn't change doesn't have to happen overnight. I think especially if you're doing more of an agile thing, or I mean it being agile is incremental progress. So you can, so even though you're going in and going like, oh, like this is awful. After everything I've learned, like this is terrible. It's also an opportunity to do incremental change. So maybe you do the change so subtly that they don't even realize that it's happening until all of a sudden they're well-oiled, you know, understand Salesforce releases and all that stuff, and doing things proactively. And there's user stories and Jira and who knows. But those would be my kind of initial recommendations.
I've done like ticket logs and stuff that are open to the organization, which basically has the potential requests, and they've already been kind of filtered through of how much time each one would take, or if certain requests require additional information or a conversation. Like you can't just submit, I need a field without having a conversation, because that's going to affect workflows and everything else. But maybe you need help text adjusted or something, or a report built for a certain case. Those could be, done at instant, pretty much quickly. And then, I mean, the directors will need to be involved in that so they can at least see these are coming in and these need to be addressed. And these are the ones that we need your input on before we can move forward. So being more transparent with the requests was helpful at another organization, because everybody was also like, oh, but you're working on this, but we submitted this. I know, but they were in line first. So the requests have to happen as they come in, or by, unless the director says you need to push this above everything else. So
I think keeping that list is also useful then to, in a sense, kind of keep score, to be able to remember, here's this request that came in as a rush 6 months ago. I just added that checkbox, and now 6 months later, it's not working for them, or they're asking for something else, and that gives you a little bit of evidence to go back to the execs with. Yeah, I think the other thing I might say, this is more of a general approach, is just like try to get in and understand sort of the business or the teams and the work they're doing, like in between times, so that when some new request comes in, you might have some extra thoughtful questions about, okay, great. Oh, they say they just want a box that says checkbox, a payment's made. But hey, I remember talking to finance a couple months ago, and they've got these issues with the process. And so, becoming more of an expert in the way your users work, I think help you identify, okay, great, yep, a checkbox is probably fine. I'm not going to fight this, versus like, oh, I think we really need to sit down with finance and come up with a new process for this.
I can't believe we're actually almost at time. Jessica, do you see any questions that we could ask? It's like a quick one, or do you think we should just wrap it up here and then take it offline?
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up. I know some people might have to jump at 1, so also don't want to hold them.
Got it.
Mhm.
Well, then I want to take time right now on behalf of everyone here to thank the panelists for their time and for their insight. I hope everyone here learned a little something that moves them forward in their career beyond the technical skills here. And right now, I'll stop the recording after this. And again, feel free to hang out and network if you have the time and the capacity to do so. But thank you so much, panelists, for helping us out today.
Pleasure.